Welcome, everybody. Would you please start by giving us your name and the name of the course?
My name is Maddie Fitzgerald, and the course is Accountable Leaders.
So when you think about what you've gone through this whole semester, what did you take away from this class?
The biggest thing I learned, we talked a lot about the different leadership styles, and when we looked at all the accountable leaders, some of them were more extroverted and some of them were better at managing people directly and working in one-on-one situations. They were all really hard workers, and they were all really competent, and they were all really skilled, and they were all willing to learn. But one of the biggest things that I saw was the leaders that I really felt that I could relate to. They spoke a lot about connection and the people that were a part of their journey. So Dr. Sullivan, for example, he spoke to the value of the role models that he had in his life, whether they were his parents or his teachers growing up, and the people that really believed in him and had an impact on him and made him feel like he could achieve. And he spoke more to that in seeing, he was an African American in a time where that was, much harder than even now, where it's not exactly the easiest things. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir a bit here. He overcame so much adversity, but a lot of that was catalyzed when he came to Atlanta and he saw people achieving, and he was able to say, those people are, like tremendously successful, and that hasn't gotten in their way, and so why couldn't I do that? And then he went on and, I'm sure far exceeded what many of them could have done.
Maddie, you talked about Dr. Sullivan, and I assume that means Dr. Lewis Sullivan, and you talked a lot about his background. Tell us what you took away from his story.
I think one of the biggest things I got out of his talk in particular, he was very adaptable. A lot of the things that he ended up excelling in and working toward were not a part of his plan, specifically like developing, the medical school, Morehouse. That was never something that he even wanted to be a part of once he found out that it was a project. But it was something that he believed in. It was something that, I guess, it's not that he didn't want to be a part of it. He didn't want to play the role that he ultimately ended up playing. And he was incredibly humble, but he was also incredibly willing to rise to the occasion, which, oftentimes due to his incredibly competent nature, many people were willing to ask that of him.
Maddie, when you talked about Dr. Lewis Sullivan, one of the words you used, which I thought was fantastic, was an MBA word that you used called catalyzed. As you recall, when I came and visited your class several weeks ago, I asked you what was the main word that you took away, and was catalyzed that word?
It wasn't. My word, a little bit less of an SAT word, was connection.
Help us understand why that one word that you boiled it down to was connection, and why that one word was so important to you that you used it to signify your journey throughout this whole course.
I guess it was the most common element between all of the leaders with whom I was able to really connect. Betty Siegel talked a lot about, she cited an example of her 4th grade teacher in a moment where she was in a really vulnerable situation. She cheated on a spelling test, and I think she said the word was kitchen, and that she'd written it down on a little piece of paper, and she pulled it out and she looked up at her teacher, and her teacher saw her cheat, and she called her up after and she said, "Betty, I saw you cheating." And she took that opportunity. She didn't shame her. She didn't, put her down for that. She told her, she said, "You're smart and you don't need to be doing that." And in that moment, she connected with Betty, and now, like so many years later, she's telling that story as an example of something that really made a difference in the way that she saw herself. The idea that people will rise to the expectations that you have of them, and she felt that that was expected of her, and clearly, she's been amazingly successful. And I think that, that's something that she spoke to, really influencing her idea of what it means to be a leader, which she clearly, she's clearly a fantastic leader. I think most of the parts of my life that really matter, that really mean a lot to me, in which I'm really invested, deal with people. And the people are usually the part of those things, you know, whatever it is, whatever kind of community I'm involved in, you know, or activity or course, you know, if there's a strong sense of community there and I feel connected, then, you know, I know, speaking personally, I'm willing to put so much more of myself into whatever it is that we're doing, because you see a return, you know, you get something back. And I think that, you know, that's probably true of a lot of people, but I know especially from my experience when I've had professors or mentors who have been really invested in my own success or the success of my peers, you know, I've always been willing to rise to that occasion, and happily.
Well, very good. So you profiled Dr. Lewis Sullivan out of all the leaders that were there, and then from Dr. Lewis Sullivan you were able to see the connection, make that connection with your own personal life and how it resonates with you. So based on what you've been able to do in this class, what do you see as the actionable skill from having learned all of this stuff?
I work with kids a lot, and that's something that I really enjoy. And there are a lot of subtleties in the communication between you and a kid, you know, when it comes to simple things like, you know, helping them engage in something or like invest themselves in something that they wouldn't otherwise, you know, even now, like some kids have, you know, a harder time getting excited about going outside than others, or just homework. And I think that the approach that I've taken with my children, not my children, but the children I work with, is
but
I've
they're
seen
your children.
Yeah, you know, and I do feel that, and I feel connected to them.
Yeah.
There is that connection, and all of the times that, and I think this is something that I'd been aware of but hadn't been able to put in words beforehand. But when I'm able to actually, and you know, it's about getting them to do it, but it's about so much more than that, because they'll do their homework and resent you and not want to spend time with you. But if you're invested in what they're doing, then they, you know, it's a lot easier to expect them to be invested in it as well. And so it's one thing to sit there and say, hey guys, go play outside, and it's another to say, hey guys, let's go play outside. And the difference in that one word, you know, it's a world.
Maddie, I understand you chose your subject for your thesis based upon your work in this class, correct?
Absolutely.
Can you frame what you did with your thesis for us, and also tell us a little bit about what you found so interesting about the entire experience?
We selected a thesis and connected it to what we learned from the leaders and what we learned from the deliverables. And the one I chose was nurturing interpersonal relationships in knowledge-sharing environments. And it spoke a lot about, you know, this is the very soft, squishy concept, the idea of trust. And that was a lot of what they found was ultimately when they took every element of, you know, a workplace, which is a very chaotic environment, when they boiled it all down, it came down to two key concepts, and that was the trust in your coworker or whoever it is you're working with, trust in their competence and trust in their benevolence. So if you trust that they're capable of meeting what the requirements that are expected of them, and if they're going to do that, if they're working in the best interest of the people around them, and if they're helpful. So anything, any problem you take, any problem with communication or trust in a workplace can be boiled down to those two elements. And I thought that was really interesting. And it was definitely looking at the stories that the leaders had to share through that lens really helped me understand what ended up being a pretty extensive commonality that they all shared.
Maddie, thank you for your responses, and we're going to let you take a breath for a second, and we're going to pivot to your right, and we're going to start with this gentleman. So please identify who you are.
My name is Stephen Pritchett.
So Stephen, tell us, what did you take away from this class?
What I took away from this class was, especially with Jim Blanchard, was that what's more important than what your views are in leadership are, is how willing you are to make sure you put those views into practice. Jim Blanchard believed that trust and respect and treating other people as you think is right is very important for a workplace, but none of that would have been anything if you weren't willing to make sure everyone did exactly that in this company.
Stephen, when you went through the TCAL library, the Center for Accountable Leadership, what is it that allowed you to really focus in on Jim Blanchard?
Well, when Dr. Teeters was describing them to us, he said that Jim Blanchard fired 150 people in the span of 6 months.
Wow.
And I really wanted to know why he did that.
Good. Can you say more about that?
Yes, I watched his video and I found out the reason he fired 150 people in such a short span of time is because one day he decided that he didn't want anyone in the company who his workers wouldn't feel comfortable working for. Anyone who was disrespectful or, untrustworthy. So he just said one day, we're going to just get rid of all those people. So he gave all those people a chance to change, and if they couldn't change, then he removed them.
If you recall, I visited the class and I asked each one of the students to give me one word that would sum up their whole experience in this particular course. What word did you sum up for your experience having gone through a lot of the background on Jim Blanchard?
Determined.
Determined. Tell us why that one word resonates with you.
Getting rid of that many employees in such a short span of time must have gotten him a lot of criticism. But despite that, he kept doing it, and now his company is much more successful than it was when he started as president.
So what are you taking away from his stories and his methods that you can actually use in your own career?
Well, I learned that for him, the most important things in an organization are trust, respect, and treating other people right. But not just that. It's not just enough to to value those things. It's equally important to be willing to make sure those things are put into practice.
How do you exemplify both respect and trust in what you do, and how do you apply it in your own leadership?
I'm a leader in a student organization, and I see what happens to an organization if the people inside of it don't trust each other, or they don't have respect for each other, and it generally ends badly. So,
yeah, exactly right.
So when you think about what you've learned about Jim Blanchard, what most parallels for you? Is it what you're doing today, how you can apply it today, or really more aspirational, what you see yourself doing in the future?
I want to apply placing importance on respect and trust. And the second thing I want to apply is the practice of not tolerating any kind of deviation from that. If you can't respect someone and you can't be trustworthy, then you need to leave or be put somewhere where you can't damage anything.
It's very tough to see those two things. So my question to you is, how do you really exemplify that respect and trust? How do you get that and apply it?
Oh, how do I act trustworthy and respectful?
Actually apply that. How do you make me feel that I'm trustworthy or you're trustworthy?
Well, by being dependable. If I say I'm going to do something, I need to do it. And respectful, never say something to someone else that you wouldn't want said to you.
Fantastic. So when you consider what you've done this whole semester, what would you tell any student considering taking this class?
Well, they should.
Why?
Because they can learn a lot of useful information. These leaders are all very successful, and so clearly they have useful information. And if they're willing to share it, you should listen.
Absolutely. Everything we learned in this class is relevant to anything that we'd want to pursue.